G'day folks, and welcome to Gormo's Shed. And this week we're looking at loads to go in your little wagons. Now this is just a fairly ordinary looking little wagon here, and you can make a load to go into that's removable, and using the methods that's been around for years, which is just foam rubber, and then we'll put something on top of the foam rubber to disguise it. And that will be a load of coal, or you could use all sorts of, even ballast or anything like that to sort of disguise it. I mean, there's all sorts of different loads you can do, but in this case we're just using foam rubber and a load of coal to go in this one. I mean, how many times have you seen layouts where there's just loads of empty wagons going around? Well, in reality, the wagons had a purpose, and that was to carry coal or other loads to deliver them along the way, along the railway. So we'll move out into the workshop and we'll have a look at how we're going to do it. Right, the first thing you need, folks, is to know what you're dealing with here. So we need some measurements, and I've measured this wagon and I've come up with 29 by 68 by 17 millimeters. That's the internal dimensions of this wagon. So we've got the length, the width and the height to the top edge. So that's our starting point, and I've written that down because the way I'm going, I'll forget it in 5 minutes. So anyway, I've got all that written down. So that's our first stage. Now I've got a block of foam rubber here, and this is way too much. I'm going to have to cut this down, and I found this at one of our council cleanups in the area here. Somebody had thrown out an old lounge, and this was the cushion, or part of the cushion for the lounge. Now I've cut it up into small blocks. I was doing other projects with it, but on this particular block I've got some rough edges where I've cut it, but I've also got two flat surfaces, the top and the bottom. So I've got something, at least let's call it square, to start with, and then I'll have to cut this up into the size to suit the internal dimensions of the wagon. And I'm also going to cut it quite a bit higher than the wagon, so we can have a sort of a what would you call it, a domed load, or a raised up load in the wagon. So first thing we need to do is measure this up, or at least square it up to start with, and I'll show you how I go about that. And the way I go about that is with this. You may remember that some time back I did a video about making a hot wire cutter, and this is the little sucker, and not only will it cut polystyrene, it's also very good for cutting foam rubber. So I can set this up in my Black & Decker Workmate and get it all sort of squared up and make myself a jig for cutting this foam rubber. So we'll go about that now. Right, the first thing to do is set it up in the Black & Decker Workmate, and make sure that the cutting wire is as close to vertical as you can get it. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just makes everything work easier. And we're only talking about vertical in this plane here. It doesn't really matter if it's angled across when you're cutting it. So that'll do. The next thing to do is to set up a fence so that we can cut accurately a straight line, and I've just got this set back a little bit from the cutting wire. I'm taking about 8 millimeters off, so that's fine. Now I've got my flat edge facing up, obviously the other one facing the bottom, so we know they're square, and I'm just going to slide it across here now through the hot wire to try and get something resembling a square edge. You have to go a bit slower through foam rubber than you do through polystyrene. It's slightly more difficult for the wire to cut through. Not much in it though, really.
and just take your time and allow the wire to do the heat from the wire to do the cutting. Don't try and force it. And there we are. We have one pretty good straight edge there. Now I'll go through and do the other 3 edges just to square it up, and then we'll take it from there and see how we cut it down to the actual size we want. Now we've finished up with a fairly good sort of a cube here, and I think the first thing I'll do is try and cut out the height I want. So remember that the depth of the wagon was 17mm, so I'll use my original flat surfaces that I had from the product itself, and this is one of them, because I know they're dead flat, and I'll use that as a guide to cut off the actual depth I want. So 17mm, I might go, I don't know, a bit over 20mm to get the initial height, and then we'll work on it from there. By the way, that's the little pieces that have come off the sides. They could be useful for something, a bit of packing or something. If you've got a wagon you want to, or a loco you want to pack into a box, it could protect it, so it might be worth hanging on to those. Right folks, so I'm just moving my fence back to 20mm here, and then I'll lock that down. Fence doesn't have to actually be square to the workmate, because being a wire, you know, it's so thin you could even have it on an angle, so if it's slightly off it doesn't really matter. It's still going to cut at the same distance from the wire, if that makes sense. Anyway, now let's see, I've got to find my flat surface again. That's one of them. Right, so wires on, so we'll go for our 20mm cut. That was a bit jerky folks, bit of a jump there. Doesn't matter, we can use that for the top. The top's not going to be even. What's important is to have that flat base for the bottom, and then we'll do the sides as well accurately. So there's our thickness, just like that. Turn them out like little sausages. Yep, that's shaping up good. So now we need the length and the width. So I'll get that done, same method, and then we'll come back to the next stage. Right, that's it done now, and we'll just try that in the wagon for fit. Should be just snug. You know, you don't want tight, and you don't want it loose either. And this foam rubber, probably over a number of years, will probably shrink. That's happened on some of my older wagons, and I'm talking about 20 or 30 years, folks. So it'll shrink eventually, but then just make some more. But this is a nice fit, and we'll probably now shape this top just ever so slightly to drop it down below the ends and the sides possibly. So I'm going to have to be careful with that, but I'll do it with the hot wire cutter, and I'll get my shape, and then it's on to colouring it up and putting some coal on there. Now folks, I've just gently sliced away at it, and you'll notice that I've got all the edges down below the top edge of the wagon. That's because I don't want anything sort of sticking up that you can see that, you know, tells you obviously it's a piece of foam rubber there. So what we're going to do now is colour this up and add some coal load on top of it. And we won't worry about that being flat just there, because you know, you can build up coal on top of that to sort of make that look less flat. So we'll start colouring up now and get into it, and I think I can probably paint it and add glue on top of it, and then the coal load pretty much all in one go, so it's not going to be any big deal. I mean, once it all dries, it's all going to blend together anyway. Now what we're using folks here is some chalkboard paint. You don't have to use that, you can use whatever you've got, but I just happen to have some, and it dries nice and flat and black. So I'm using that, I've got myself a barbecue skewer, and this is to hold the foam rubber while I'm painting it and gluing it and putting the coal on. And I've got some coal, can't tell you the brand now because I've taken the label off, and some PVA. So that's all we need. So we'll get into painting it. And the first thing I'll do is put this thing on a skewer, and it makes it a lot easier to hold it. And also it holds it into a piece of, you can put that into a piece of polystyrene or in a vise or whatever, and you can leave it and it will dry, and then all you do is slide the skewer out. So I'll get set up to paint it now. Okay folks, you don't have to be too careful about this, but you need to make sure that it's covered and potentially hiding any of the edges, you know. But as I said, we've cut this down below the top edges of the wagon, so the any unpainted foam rubber won't be seen once this is in place properly. Well, there you are folks, that's just with the black paint on it, and it's drying as we speak. And I think, you know, the weather's quite good here today, so that'll dry in no time. But I wouldn't hesitate to sort of even go straight ahead now and put PVA on it and start working away with putting coal on it, because it's all going to dry together. The PVA is going to dry clear, and possibly PVA and paint drying together make the coal stick even better. But that remains to be seen. But you can see that you can't really see any light patches through it, which is good if we lose any of the coal over time. But then again, we can always add a bit more on if necessary. So yeah, so we'll move on to the next stage now, which is gluing and adding coal to the top of this here. Okay folks, I'm going to add my PVA onto this foam rubber now, but I've got also here this plastic container. And once the PVA is on here, I'm going to tip my coal onto this glued foam rubber, and any excess is going to fall into the container so I can recover it. I don't want to waste any of this coal, and I've got a little corner cut off of the packet so I can just tip it on. So the thing is now to get this well coated with PVA, and I'll pour a fair bit of it on, and then I'll spread it out with a brush, and we'll get that happening. And yeah, so we'll see how we go with that. The idea is to get a nice coating on there, and probably work with the brush now, I think, to spread that around. I might even hold it against the edge of the container there just to stop it moving. But we need to cover the whole surface. Doesn't matter if you go down below the black line, it's all going to dry anyway. And yeah, we need the liberal coating of glue to make sure that the coal will stick over the whole surface. Mind you, the way this comes up, the foam rubber is not a bad representation of coal. I mean, it's on close inspection it's not great, but you know, from a distance it looks pretty good just by itself actually. I might add a bit more glue on there just to make sure we got it well covered. I'll kill it with kindness. So yeah, because it'll tend to soak in a bit too, I suppose, into the foam rubber. Okay, well, we'll give it a go and see how it turns out. So we'll tip some coal on there. Seems to be sticking pretty well. That's good. Okay, it's a bit difficult to see No, I'll put some more on the top there. Okay, now all we've got to do is let that dry, and I've got myself a bit of polystyrene here, and all I'm going to do is put the skewer into that vertically and just let it sit there and dry. I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, that's what it looks like, and you can see the PVA through there a bit. But I think that's going to come up pretty good actually. And you know, if you want to, you can always add a bit more on later, but we'll let that lot dry and see how it turns out. Well folks, we're at that stage where we can try it out, so it's pretty much dried enough now to allow us to fit it to the wagon. So I'll do it over the container again, because I've got a feeling we might lose a little bit off the sides as we push it in. So if we drop it in the, do it in the over the container and push it in, well, whatever falls off we can recover that and put it back with the supply of coal that we have. Do a snug fit. It's going in all right. We're losing a few little bits and pieces off it, not much actually, but that's all right. It still looks good. Actually, that's not bad at all. There we are. Look at that. I'll bring the camera down and do it on the bench here so you can see what it looks like. Right, there we go. I'll just turn it around. One load of coal. And it doesn't sit up too high. I could probably add a bit more to the top there just to round it off a bit more, but that's fine. And that'll just pop out if I want it to. So there you are folks. Okay folks, well I hope you enjoyed that fairly simple little exercise into adding a wagon load to your wagons. I think it's quite easy to do actually, and you don't necessarily need a hot wire cutter to cut up the foam rubber. I'm sure you can think of other ways to do that yourself, but yes, it's come up quite well. This little wagon still needs some couplings on it to sort of allow it to go into service, but it looks quite good sitting in the siding anyway. So there you are. I'll leave you with it, and I hope you enjoyed that. So I'll see you next week. Cheers, Gormo.